answer because the research has shown that the recommendations of replacing, it's too individual, that at certain ages to replace like ounce for ounce or just a standard recommendation. If you say you take 8 ounces, you're good, or 12 ounces. They've gotten away from that with the American College of Sports Medicine. So I can't give you an exact amount. There's two ways to look at it. One is drink enough so that you're not thirsty. And then some of the other recommendations are, I mean, like 3 sounds excessive, you know, for a 10-year-old, and then just reminding them that a serving size is still 8 ounces, and it's hard to find Gatorade in smaller than 12 ounces, so it's already a serving and a half. The other thing is we don't usually, even after an hour of exercise, we don't usually recommend just exclusively a carbohydrate electrolyte replacement, but rather still like a combination of 50-50 carbohydrate electrolyte and water still. So you don't cut water off after the first hour, you just start adding water as a replacement plus your carbohydrate electrolyte.
But just to comment, you know, kids have successfully been engaged in activities, physical activities, running around all afternoon for generations before sports drinks were marketed. You know, we're talking about extreme levels of athletic and competitive physical activities. If you're running a marathon, if you're engaged in competitive varsity sports for hours at a time, sweating a great deal, but 99% of children don't need sports drinks to satisfy their fluid requirements. They can take a break, have an apple, you know, a snack, and get nutrients that way. So, you know, in most PE settings, it's not going to be needed.
Right. I don't think there's a physical education class strenuous enough to have any kind of need for Gatorade that way. But the vast majority of your recreational sports like soccer and basketball and all that, you're right, the intensity level probably doesn't go up enough till you're in the teenage years. But it's a great question, thank you.
I guess this is also kind of playing into that. I'm wondering if you guys are familiar with the Refuel campaign that Milk has been running about chocolate milk for athletes. I'm kind of curious as to whether you have any comments about that and whether that's something you compare as being better than sports drinks. I know you mentioned milk, but you were mainly talking about low-fat milk or skim milk.
There was a hotly debated point with the Academy when we looked at the paper and the data. The best data out there that I'm familiar with, it looks at low-fat milk, actually they looked at chocolate milk even as a recovery drink being very effective because it has a protein in it as well. So I think the basic recommendations in the sports world, the sports literature right now, are to consider milk as a recovery drink. It's important that you recover your liver, especially after high-intensity exercise when you're glycogen depleted. Within 30 minutes is ideal. It's more effective. And having low-fat milk at that point is probably most effective. I really don't think in practicality, although the nutritionists argued with us a bit, that you're going to see Gatorade replaced by milk on the sideline, like soccer and football and lacrosse and things like that. Although they are curious, some of the nutritionists, about whether there's a role for milk in that, but I don't see it in practice clinically or practically in the sideline setting necessarily. But you're right, absolutely, it is probably the best recovery drink out there that's as good as any food.
I'm sorry, Dr. Benjamin, did you say milk or flavored milk? Because you were talking about chocolate milk, right? So
the literature hasn't really distinguished between the flavored or non-flavored milk in terms of chocolate. I mean, they drink it better, faster with the chocolate, but it's sort of the protein content is what's been really looked at as being helpful, and the carbohydrate content as being effective for post-exercise recovery. So it's absolutely okay to drink milk right after your strenuous exercise.
Okay, Dr. Ludwig.
Again, just to emphasize, these are, the only meaning for, liver recovery is so you can, get back and run, do highly competitive sports the next day most efficiently. In modern food environment, most of us, and especially children, are in a state of overnutrition all the time. It's actually a good thing to deplete liver glycogen and leave it depleted for a few hours of the day. So, again, in 99.9% of the settings, one needed to consider replacement, and in fact, replacement can easily undermine all of the benefits of the physical activity if consciousness isn't made in choosing how to eat afterwards. Again, it's very easy to get more calories than were burned off by a large sugar-containing beverage, be that chocolate milk or a very large Gatorade.
Yeah, that's a point well taken. Some of these issues are really good for high-level athletes, but the athlete that's obese or your overweight athlete, who I should say adolescent, who's trying to lose weight, that's one of the biggest failures I see. What Dr. Ludwig's saying is they're overcompensating after their exercise by eating more than they burned off.
I may have missed it this morning or it's coming up regarding not this. I mean, I know this is about sugar, high sugar content sodas, but also, do you know anything about the diet sodas? It seems like there's a lot more information coming out about that in terms of it being affecting obesity, in terms of people's appetite might be increased or something. I know this is a little bit out of our category, but I have a lot of people that try to use those instead of the sugar-filled drinks, and I'm not sure that they're very good.
The epidemiological studies are unclear, but generally suggest that sugary beverages are worse. I showed you a few clinical trials that, at least in the short term, suggest that going from sugar-sweetened beverages to artificially sweetened beverages may have some benefits. But that doesn't mean that artificially sweetened beverages are as good as water. Some research released at the obesity meetings last fall identified sweetness receptors, the things that make food taste sweet on the taste buds, actually in fat cells. And those sweetness receptors are able to be stimulated by concentrations of artificial sweetener that are obtained after just having one or two of them and that circulate in the bloodstream. The implications of that are that we may be not getting calories that moment, but creating metabolic changes in our fat tissue activity or hormones or brain perceptions that link up sweetness, tastes with biochemical responses that might not be a good thing for the long term. We certainly need clinical trials there, but I think one thing I believe is that these beverages can be used as a transition aid off of sugary beverages. Let's just not stop there.
And I'll also add, there's also a lot of discussion in studies that potentially haven't followed people long enough or didn't get enough information on what they used to previously drink before they started artificially sweetened beverages. So there's this big looming question of whether or not it's reverse causation, whether or not someone who got to a state of being overweight or obese by drinking sugar-sweetened beverages then switched to consuming that same amount in artificially sweetened beverages. It can also make that association look like it's causal, but if you really don't have all of the information, it can be an issue of it really was sugar sweetened, they switched, but now it looks like they're consuming that amount and they're still overweight. So that's one of the limitations of cross-sectional studies, and to really look at the literature and be able to follow them long enough to look at before they gained weight, what they drank, and then if they gained weight as a result, sometime in the future. If that makes sense.
So the CDC brief that the beverage industry was using to refute the association between sweet drinks and obesity cited that most sugar that's consumed in America is actually consumed in solid foods such as cookies, pies, and various other types of foods. Nevertheless, I think we know that, I think Dr. Ludwig pointed out, there's nothing inherently bad about sugar. It's when you do consume it in solid form, you're more likely to compensate or adjust your intake afterwards by reducing your caloric intake afterwards compared to sugar in liquid form. I would also point out from a historical perspective, most people think that we've been consuming table sugar and other forms of sugar for thousands of years. And that's just simply not the case. In fact, in the 1800s, there was molasses, which was very pricey, and only table sugar really became common only if you started the 20th century. So this isn't something that humans necessarily need as part of their diet.
Law of thermodynamics, and I think that in light of the fact that people consuming a raw diet equal weight of a cooked diet, it's the same foodstuffs. And you cook one and you eat the other one raw, and in a controlled study, one person will gain weight, the other one won't. And then the other phenomenon has to do with fructose, which is molecularly the same molecular weight as glucose. However, fructose is only metabolized in the liver and favors fat synthesis in the liver. Glucose will either replete glycogen or used as energy, or way down the pathway, it will make fat. But so I think that's somewhat of a smokescreen. It's a distraction to say that calories in equals calories out. Certain foodstuffs are utilized differently by the body. We're just starting to find that out. And you can't exercise off a Big Mac. It takes 3 hours. So it's not what you eat, it's what you do with you eat. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. You have any comment?
No, I agree. Your point is well taken. I think I tried to emphasize the individual metabolism and how foods are metabolized and what your body does with it is very individualized, and their calories are not all equivalent. But I think the concept of energy balance, as you said, that's one of the message I say to kids after reading my comment is, if you're going to eat a Big Mac, can you run for 3 hours? Can you essentially run a marathon to run it off with the fries? Or to put that in, that if that's 500 calories, do you know how hard it is to burn 500 calories? You have to run, an 8-minute mile for 6 miles or 8 miles, to do that. And again, and if you're not capable of doing that, rethink your food choice or your portion sizes and all that. But I think the concept that you have to be able to metabolically handle what you take in some combination of your own individual metabolism, your amount of exercise and all of that. And if that guides your food choices, that's, I think, the message, but that's a complex message. So I think I was maybe presenting it a bit simplistically for the kids, sort of as you would explain to an adolescent. But your point is well taken.
Well, the other thing is that our whole system of assessing calories to macronutrients, proteins 4, carbohydrates 4, fats 9, that was designed in the 1800s, and it was predicated on a bomb calorimeter. We're not bomb calorimeters. And I think, but it's going to be expensive to revise that system, but I think it's important that people understand that we got a problem with our system.
Okay, another question? Over here?
Can you discuss the association between sugar and lipids that came up in some of your presentations, that intake of sugars will in some way raise bad cholesterol and reduce the good cholesterol?
I might actually pass that off to Dr. Ludwig if he has more of a biochemical explanation. I'm unfortunately an epidemiologist and not so much of a biochemist, so I look at all of the data and assess associations, and then I pass it on down to the biochemists and say, okay, how could this be happening? So there's not a lot of strong theories out there, but I have a feeling you might have a few officially.
Stop your one. For many years, the focus in nutrition, public health was to decrease dietary fat. The theory was if you don't want fat on your body or floating in your bloodstream, don't eat fat. We know how well that turned out, not very, because as fat consumption has declined, the obesity epidemic emerged. My epidemiologist friend will remind me that that's just an association. But what's very clear mechanistically is that dietary fat, especially, it's the quality of the dietary fat that matters most in determining our cardiovascular disease risk. Mono and polyunsaturated fats don't raise lipid risks and actually improve them, whereas saturated fats to some degree and trans fats, the partially hydrogenated fats, are the worst. What we're now realizing is the same is true for carbohydrates. Slow release carbohydrates, vegetables, fruits, legumes, improve lipids and especially good for triglycerides, whereas high glycemic carbohydrates, and sugar is the granddaddy, concentrated sugar is the granddaddy of them all, raises triglycerides. That's the amount of fat in the bloodstream. The more refined carbohydrate you eat, the higher the triglycerides and the lower the HDL, which is the hallmark of the metabolic syndrome. And that's probably through effects of insulin and insulin resistance, and changes in the biochemical expression of enzymes in the liver. Well, the bottom line is that the quality of the nutrients, not the relative ratio of fat and carbohydrate, is what determines cardiovascular disease risk.
Okay.
Maybe I would just add one thing, is that, building on your remarks, that sugar used to be a precious, prized, and rare commodity in human culture. The apple was, this symbol of exquisite sweetness, and in some traditions, sin, because it was just so sinfully delicious. Fruit was about the sweetest thing that we could get, and we couldn't get it all the time. Concentrated sources of sweetness, things like table sugar or molasses or honey, were very rare and very expensive, until like the triangle with the slaves came from Africa to the Caribbean. I remember learning about this in history, that triangle trade. But that was really in the 1800s, 1700s, and really in the 1800s, where sugar, and then the last century, where sugar became so ubiquitous and so cheap. I think that our challenge is to rediscover the preciousness of sweetness, that we can enjoy it, really enjoy it in small amounts. But too much of a good thing, that sugar in its many forms, liquid and concentrated solid forms, are probably the dominant negative factor in the food supply now that trans fats are going out. And it's really our job to rediscover how wonderful, satisfying, tasty a diet can be based on the other complicated flavors that have always been consumed in traditional cuisines, not just overloaded with sugar.
And I'll also make a comment. There's a lot of literature that's been shown that if, particularly in the area of sodium, that if sodium amounts in the food supply are slowly reduced over time through manufacturing, that it's virtually unnoticed by the population. It's when you make a quick change and drop a lot of sodium that people go, ooh, this doesn't taste very good. So I think the same approach can be taken to sugar when it comes to different beverages, foods, whatnot. If over time reductions in sugar are to occur at a slow pace, it'll be virtually undetected by the population, and we'll get to a point where things taste too sweet again, if you have something of that level. So one policy approach that's been thrown around a lot in the sodium literature is just reduce it in the food supply across the board, and I think that same approach could be very effective for sugar itself.
Since we're all kind of making closing remarks, I think that one question that I'm often asked is, why are we focused on sweet beverages versus other causes of obesity, whether it's fast food or lack of exercise? And one answer I can give is that I think it's relatively easy for us to fix. I'm very optimistic about this problem, because as a physician, trying to get a patient to exercise regularly is very, very challenging, or cut back on their portions. The other thing is that, when you talk to a family and it's late at night and both mom and dad work and they don't have a lot of money, to ask them to prepare a nice meal at home instead of going to a drive-through is really something that's difficult to do. It's a hard choice to make. However, if they're going through that drive-through and they request bottled water or something, or at the very least a low-calorie beverage versus a high-calorie beverage, that's a very easy choice that they can make. And that's a very easy approach to solving the obesity epidemic. If we start with sugar-sweetened beverages, I think we can move on to some of the other challenges that we face.
Well, I have a question. This question will be directed towards Dr. Rao. One of the guests today came up and asked me, what type of recommendations would you offer for young children who do drink sugary beverages? And say you do have the 3-year-old who only drinks 100% less sweetened apple juice, and getting them away from that. Are there substitutions that you would recommend, whether it be at a slow pace or a strategy to reducing that level of calorie and sugar from beverages like that?
Yeah, so there's an age-dependent approach to changing beverage consumption that I think is really important. So let's face it, a 3-year-old doesn't make a lot, doesn't have a lot of purchasing power. Some of them can open the refrigerator barely. I can tell you from personal experience, not very well. So they don't have a lot of choice. And of course, you know, the answer you always get from parents is, well, they won't drink anything else. One fact that remains undisputed is that if a child or an adult is thirsty, they will drink what is available. Switch them to water, get them to go cold turkey to water, in addition to milk if they are consuming milk. And try it for at least a couple of weeks. And if you want, after 2 weeks, offer them a sweet beverage and see how they react to it. I think it really surprise you a great deal.
I have a suggestion. I'm a pediatric dentist, and I'm faced with this every day. You know, milk is boring, water is boring. And I've just found I've had some good success in cavity prevention and not making the kids mad. What I say is, you want apple juice, and you have to eat an apple with it. If you want orange juice, you have to have 4 orange slices with it. And if you do that, it takes away from the no, 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 don't do that, forbidden fruit, no pun intended, but it's, you get the kid to eat the real fruit with the juice. Well, the fiber fills them up. They don't drink as much. And fiber mechanically neutralizes sugar. It slows down absorption from the GI tract. And it slows down absorption into the dental plaque. The sugar is not as carcinogenic or cavity causing if they're eating the real fruit with it. They'll do it. So it's worth a try.